After 18 years of dedication, late nights, and missed family dinners, I walked into the office expecting gratitude, but instead, I found a pink slip on my desk. They didn't realize firing me would become their biggest mistake. The Seattle rain drummed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Astrotech Inc.'s 42nd floor as I stared at the termination letter in disbelief. My hands trembled slightly as I read the cold, corporate language that reduced 18 years of my life to a single paragraph about restructuring and cost optimization. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had helped design this very office space during the company's expansion in 2019, choosing every detail from the ergonomic chairs to the motivational quotes etched into the glass conference room walls. My name is Jason Everett, and until that gray Tuesday morning in March 2025, I was Senior Project Manager at Astrotech Inc., a position I had earned through years of unwavering commitment and exceptional performance. I had started at the company fresh out of college in 2007, a young programmer with big dreams and an even bigger work ethic. Over nearly 2 decades, I had climbed the corporate ladder not through office politics or schmoozing, but through sheer competence and reliability. I was the person management called when critical projects were behind schedule, when major clients threatened to walk away, or when impossible deadlines needed to be met. The early years at Astrotech had been magical. The company was smaller then, founded by a visionary entrepreneur named Dr. Margaret Chen, who believed technology should serve humanity, not just profit margins. Under her leadership, we developed innovative software solutions that revolutionized how small businesses managed their operations. I remember the excitement of those late-night coding sessions, the satisfaction of solving complex problems, and the genuine camaraderie among team members who felt like family. Dr. Chen knew everyone's name, remembered their birthdays, and never missed an opportunity to acknowledge our contributions during the company meetings. I had been instrumental in developing Astrotech's flagship product, Business Flow Pro, a comprehensive management suite that became the industry standard for mid-sized companies. The software was my baby. I had conceived its architecture, overseen its development, and personally handled its most challenging implementations. When major clients like Northwest Manufacturing and Pacific Retail Group signed million-dollar contracts, it was largely due to the robust, user-friendly solutions I had crafted. My annual performance reviews consistently rated me as exceptional, and my salary reflected my value to the organization. But success bred changes, and changes brought new leadership. Dr. Chen retired in 2023, selling her majority stake to a venture capital firm that promised to accelerate growth and maximize shareholder value. The new board appointed Victor Lawson as CEO, a sharp-suited man in his early 40s, who spoke in buzzwords and viewed employees as line items on a spreadsheet rather than human beings with families, dreams, and decades of institutional knowledge. Victor arrived with ambitious plans to triple Astrotech's revenue within 2 years. He preached efficiency, automation, and lean operations. During his first all-hands meeting, he stood confidently at the podium, his perfectly styled hair catching the stage lights as he outlined his vision for the company's future. "We're going to eliminate redundancies, streamline processes, and focus on what truly drives value," he declared, his voice carrying the practiced confidence of someone who had delivered similar speeches at previous companies. What he didn't say, but what became painfully clear over the following months, was that his definition of value had nothing to do with product quality, employee satisfaction, or long-term sustainability. Under Victor's leadership, Astrotech began cutting corners in ways that made my stomach churn. Quality assurance cycles were shortened to rush products to market faster. Customer support staff were reduced, leading to longer response times and frustrated clients. Research and development budgets were slashed, stifling the innovation that had always been the company's hallmark. When I raised concerns about these changes during leadership meetings, Victor would smile politely and assure me that market dynamics require adaptive strategies, whatever that meant. The personal cost of my dedication to Astrotech had been significant. My wife Sarah had endured countless canceled dinner plans when urgent projects demanded my attention. My two children, Emma and Michael, had grown accustomed to their father missing school events and weekend activities because of work emergencies. I had justified these sacrifices by telling myself that I was building something meaningful, contributing to a company that valued excellence and treated its employees with respect. I believed my loyalty would be rewarded, that my 18 years of service meant something beyond the numbers on a balance sheet. That belief was shattered on the morning I found the pink slip. I had arrived at the office early, as was my habit, to prepare for a crucial presentation to our largest client. The previous night, I had stayed up until 2 a.m. fine-tuning the proposal, ensuring every detail was perfect. As I approached my desk, I noticed a manila envelope with my name printed in the sterile font used by HR for official communications. Inside was a letter informing me that my position had been eliminated due to organizational restructuring, and that my employment would terminate immediately. The letter was signed by Victor Lawson, but I knew he hadn't written it. The language was too formal, too legal, too devoid of any acknowledgement of my contributions. There was no mention of my 18 years of service, no recognition of the projects I had led or the revenue I had generated. I was being dismissed like a temporary contractor whose usefulness had expired. The security escort arrived within minutes, a young guard who looked almost as uncomfortable as I felt. "I'm sorry, Mr. Everett," he mumbled as he waited for me to pack my personal belongings. "This is just procedure." I nodded, understanding that he was just doing his job, but the humiliation burned nonetheless. Colleagues who had worked with me for years avoided eye contact as I walked through the office, carrying a cardboard box filled with 18 years of memories, family photos, awards, a coffee mug my daughter had given me for Father's Day, and a small potted plant that had somehow survived on my desk despite my notorious lack of gardening skills. The drive home was a blur of anger, confusion, and disbelief. How could Victor not see my value to the company? Who would manage the critical client relationships I had cultivated over nearly 2 decades? What would happen to the projects I was leading? The problems only I knew how to solve? The questions swirled in my mind like a storm, each one intensifying my sense of betrayal. Sarah was in the kitchen when I walked through the front door at 10:30 a.m., still carrying the cardboard box. She took one look at my face and immediately understood. Without saying a word, she wrapped her arms around me, and for the first time since reading the termination letter, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had happened. 18 years of my life, dismissed with a form letter and a security escort. "I don't understand," I told Sarah as we sat at our kitchen table, the cardboard box on the floor like an unwelcome monument to corporate callousness. I gave them everything. I missed Emma's piano recitals, Michael's soccer games, our anniversary dinners. I worked weekends, holidays, vacations. What did I do wrong? Sarah reached across the table and took my hands in hers. "You didn't do anything wrong. Jason, this isn't about your performance or your value. This is about a man who sees people as numbers on a spreadsheet." Her words were meant to comfort, but they also carried a truth that was hard to accept, that loyalty and dedication meant nothing to people like Victor Lawson. The following weeks were among the darkest of my life. The initial shock gave way to a profound sense of worthlessness that I had never experienced before. I found myself questioning not just my professional abilities, but my identity as a provider and protector for my family. The savings account that had once seemed adequate now felt insufficient, and the job market for someone my age in the tech industry was more challenging than I had anticipated. Younger candidates with recent degrees commanded lower salaries, and many companies viewed experienced professionals as expensive liabilities rather than valuable assets. Sleep became elusive as my mind replayed conversations and meetings, searching for signs I had missed or mistakes I had made. During the day, I went through the motions of job searching, updating my resume, reaching out to contacts, submitting applications, but my heart wasn't in it. The rejection letters, when they came at all, felt like additional confirmation that perhaps Victor had been right about me being outdated and expendable. Emma and Michael noticed the change in their father, even though Sarah and I tried to shield them from the worst of our worries. Emma, now 16 and perceptive beyond her years, began leaving little notes of encouragement on my desk. "Dad, you're the smartest person I know," read one. "Any company would be lucky to have you," said another. Michael, 13 and more, direct in his approach, simply announced one evening at dinner that Mr. Lawson sounds like a jerk, and that he was sure I would find something way better. My parents, both retired teachers who had instilled in me the values of hard work and perseverance, were outraged on my behalf. "In our day, loyalty meant something," my father said during one of our weekly phone calls. "Companies took care of employees who took care of them. This Victor character doesn't understand what he's thrown away." My mother, ever practical, suggested I consider starting my own business. "You have the knowledge and experience, Jason. Maybe this is an opportunity to build something that reflects your values." Friends and former colleagues reached out with condolences and job leads, but many of these conversations revealed troubling patterns at Astrotech since my departure. The company was struggling with the very problems I had predicted when Victor began implementing his cost-cutting measures. Product quality had declined noticeably, leading to increased customer complaints and canceled contracts. The institutional knowledge that longtime employees like me had possessed was proving irreplaceable, and newer hires were struggling to maintain relationships with clients who had grown accustomed to dealing with experienced professionals. 3 months after my termination, I received a call from David Park, a former colleague who had also been let go during Victor's restructuring. David had been Astrotech's chief financial officer for 12 years, before being replaced by a younger executive who lacked his deep understanding of the company's financial complexities. "Jason," he said, his voice carrying a mix of frustration and determination, "I think you need to know what's really going on at Astrotech. Can we meet for coffee?" We met at a small cafe in downtown Seattle, away from the corporate district where we might encounter former colleagues. David looked tired but focused as he opened his laptop and showed me documents that made my blood run cold. "I've been digging into the company's finances since I left," he explained, "and what I've found is deeply troubling. The documents revealed a pattern of financial manipulation that went far beyond the cost-cutting measures Victor had publicly announced. He had been systematically inflating revenue figures by recognizing future earnings prematurely, a practice that created the illusion of growth while actually undermining the company's long-term stability. More damaging still, he had been siphoning money from employee benefit funds to shore up quarterly profits, then using creative accounting to hide the shortfalls. "Look at this," David said, pointing to a series of transactions that showed regular transfers from the employee pension fund to an offshore account controlled by Victor's consulting firm. "He's been stealing from our retirement savings to make his numbers look good to the board. And here," he continued, scrolling to another document, "he's been deliberately sabotaging our own products to force customers into more expensive upgrade cycles." The evidence was overwhelming and infuriating. While Victor had been preaching efficiency and market responsiveness, he had been engaging in fraud that could destroy the company and devastate the employees who remained. Worse, the product sabotage meant that customers who had trusted Astrotech solutions were being deliberately deceived, their businesses potentially damaged by software that had been designed to fail. "We have to expose this," I said, my anger building as I absorbed the full scope of Victor's betrayal. "This isn't just about what he did to us personally. He's destroying everything Dr. Chen built, and he's stealing from people who can't afford to lose their retirement savings." David nodded grimly. "I was hoping you'd say that, but we need to be smart about this. Victor has powerful connections, and if we move too quickly or without enough evidence, he could make this disappear and destroy us in the process." Over the following weeks, David and I were joined by Linda Rodriguez, former VP of Product Development, who had been terminated shortly after my own dismissal. Linda brought her own evidence of Victor's misconduct, including emails and recorded conversations that documented his explicit instructions to introduce planned obsolescence into Astrotech's software products. Together, we formed an unlikely alliance of discarded executives united by a desire for justice and a determination to protect the company and employees we still cared about despite our terminations. The investigation consumed our days and filled our nights with purpose we hadn't felt since leaving Astrotech. We methodically gathered evidence, cross-referenced financial records, and documented a comprehensive pattern of fraud and negligence that painted Victor Lawson not as an innovative CEO, but as a criminal who had infiltrated a respected company for personal gain. But even as we compiled evidence of Victor's crimes, I realized that exposing his wrongdoing wouldn't be enough to satisfy the sense of betrayal I carried. I wanted more than justice. I wanted to prove that his assessment of my value had been catastrophically wrong. I wanted to show him, the board, and everyone else who had written me off that experience, integrity and dedication were not outdated concepts, but competitive advantages in a world increasingly dominated by short-term thinking and ethical shortcuts. The idea came to me during a sleepless night in July, 6 months after my termination. If Victor believed that loyal, experienced employees were expendable in favor of cheaper alternatives, I would prove him wrong by demonstrating what those discarded employees could accomplish when properly motivated and freed from corporate constraints that prioritized quarterly earnings over sustainable growth. I would start my own company. The decision terrified and exhilarated me in equal measure. At 52, with a mortgage, 2 children approaching college age, and no guarantee of success, starting a business represented the biggest risk I had ever taken. But it also represented the opportunity to build something that reflected my values, to create a workplace culture that honored loyalty and rewarded dedication, and to develop products that prioritized customer needs over profit margins. Sarah's reaction surprised me. I had expected concern, perhaps resistance to the financial uncertainty that entrepreneurship would bring. Instead, she listened to my proposal with growing excitement. "Jason," she said when I finished explaining my vision, "this is who you've always been. You've always been a builder, a problem solver, someone who cares more about doing things right than taking shortcuts. Astrotech was lucky to have you, but maybe you were never meant to work for someone else's dream. Maybe you were meant to build your own." The children were equally supportive, though their perspective was characteristically direct. "Does this mean you'll be home for dinner more often?" Michael asked. Emma, more concerned with the broader implications, wanted to know if starting my own company meant we would be competing with Astrotech. When I confirmed that we would be, she smiled with the fierce loyalty only a teenager can muster. "Good," she said. "They deserve to lose to someone better." I named the company Evertech Solutions, a play on my surname that also reflected my commitment to enduring excellence rather than temporary fixes. The logo I designed was simple but meaningful. A sturdy oak tree with deep roots and strong branches, symbolizing growth built on a foundation of stability and integrity. The early months of Evertech were simultaneously the most challenging and most rewarding of my career. Working from our converted garage, I began developing a business management suite that would compete directly with Astrotech's Business Flow Pro. But instead of simply copying existing features, I focused on addressing the pain points and limitations that I had heard from clients during my 18 years in the industry. Where Business Flow Pro was complex and required extensive training, Evertech's solution would be intuitive and user-friendly. Where Astrotech's software was increasingly unreliable due to Victor's corner cutting, Evertech would prioritize stability and performance above all else. Most importantly, where Victor's company treated customers as revenue sources to be maximized, Evertech would build genuine partnerships based on trust and mutual success. My network of industry contacts, cultivated over nearly 2 decades, proved invaluable as I began reaching out to potential clients and partners. Many remembered my work at Astrotech and were surprised to learn about my termination. "They let you go?" was a common reaction, followed by expressions of interest in what I was building. Word spread quickly through the tight-knit community of business software users, and I began receiving inquiries about Evertech's solutions before I had even completed the first version. The development process was intensely personal in a way that corporate projects had never been. Every line of code I wrote, every feature I designed, every decision I made reflected my vision of what business software should be. There were no committees to satisfy, no quarterly targets to hit at the expense of quality, no executives demanding shortcuts that would compromise the user experience. For the first time in my career, I was free to build something excellent rather than something merely profitable. Linda Rodriguez joined Evertech as VP of Product Development in September. bringing her expertise and her own network of contacts. Her termination from AstraTech had been even more abrupt than mine. Victor had eliminated her position via email while she was on vacation with her family. "I've never been so insulted in my professional life," she told me during our first meeting. "But working with you on this investigation has reminded me how much I love building great products. Let's show them what they threw away." David Park came aboard as CFO 2 months later, completing our core team of former AstraTech executives who had been deemed expendable by Victor's restructuring. The symmetry was satisfying. The three of us represented over 40 years of combined experience in the business software industry, knowledge that Victor had casually discarded in favor of cheaper alternatives. By December 2025, 9 months after my termination, EverTech Solutions launched its flagship product FlowMax Pro to a market that was increasingly dissatisfied with AstraTech's deteriorating offerings. Our timing was perfect. Victor's cost-cutting and quality compromises were finally catching up with the company, and customers were actively seeking alternatives. The contrast between the two companies couldn't have been starker. While AstraTech's customer support wait times had increased to hours or even days, EverTech offered immediate assistance from knowledgeable professionals who understood both the software and the businesses using it. While AstraTech's recent updates had introduced bugs and instability, FlowMax Pro was rock-solid reliable, built on the lessons learned from years of watching competitors make preventable mistakes. Most importantly, while Victor continued to prioritize short-term profits over long-term relationships, EverTech focused on genuine partnership with our clients. We offered transparent pricing with no hidden fees, comprehensive training and support, and a commitment to continuous improvement based on user feedback rather than internal revenue targets. The market response exceeded our most optimistic projections. Northwest Manufacturing, one of AstraTech's largest clients and a company I had personally worked with for over a decade, became EverTech's first major customer after their contract with AstraTech expired. "We were hoping you'd start your own company," their CEO told me during the contract signing. "Working with AstraTech hasn't been the same since you left, and we've been looking for an excuse to make a change." Pacific Retail Group followed shortly after, bringing several smaller clients with them. Each new customer represented not just revenue for EverTech, but validation of the value that Victor had so carelessly discarded. The testimonials we received spoke not just to the quality of our software, but to the experience of working with professionals who understood their businesses and genuinely cared about their success. As EverTech's success became increasingly visible in industry publications and trade shows, I began hearing troubling reports about AstraTech's struggles. The company was hemorrhaging clients as quality problems mounted and customer satisfaction plummeted. Several high-profile implementations had failed catastrophically, leading to costly lawsuits and damaged reputation. Employee morale was at an all-time low as Victor continued to cut staff and benefits, while his own compensation package grew larger. The irony was obvious to everyone except Victor himself. In his attempt to maximize short-term profits by eliminating expensive employees like David, Linda, and me, he had destroyed the very foundation of AstraTech's success. The institutional knowledge we had possessed, the client relationships we had cultivated, and the commitment to quality we had maintained were proving irreplaceable. By March 2026, exactly 1 year after my termination, EverTech had captured 20% of AstraTech's market share and was growing rapidly. We had hired 15 employees, all of whom were former AstraTech staff who had either been laid off by Victor or had quit in disgust at the company's declining standards. Our office, a bright and modern space in Seattle's growing tech corridor, buzzed with the energy and enthusiasm that AstraTech had once possessed under Dr. Chen's leadership. But success in the marketplace was only part of the revenge I had been planning. The evidence that David, Linda, and I had gathered of Victor's financial crimes was comprehensive and damning, but we had been waiting for the right moment to reveal it. That moment came when AstraTech announced its annual shareholder meeting, scheduled for April 15, 2026. Victor planned to use the meeting to announce a restructuring plan that would involve further layoffs and cost-cutting measures, all while hiding the true extent of the company's financial problems. The plan we developed was elegant in its simplicity, Rather than going to the media or law enforcement directly, we would leak the evidence to investigative journalists at 3 different outlets simultaneously, timing the release for maximum impact just days before the shareholder meeting. The story would break when Victor was least prepared to respond, and the accumulated evidence would be too comprehensive for him to dismiss or explain away. On April 10th, 5 days before the shareholder meeting, the Seattle Times published the first article. Astrotech CEO accused of financial fraud and employee pension theft. The story, based on documents we had provided, detailed Victor's manipulation of revenue figures and his diversion of employee benefit funds to offshore accounts. The financial evidence was presented with charts and graphs that made the pattern of fraud impossible to ignore. The Wall Street Journal followed the next day with software giant's planned obsolescence scandal, focusing on Victor's deliberate sabotage of Astrotech's products to force costly upgrades. This story resonated particularly strongly with business customers who realized they had been deliberately deceived by a company they had trusted. TechCrunch completed the trilogy on April 12th with The Fall of Astrotech: How Corporate Greed Destroyed a Seattle Success Story. This piece provided the broader context, tracing the company's decline from Dr. Chen's principled leadership to Victor's profit-obsessed management style. The impact was immediate and devastating. Astrotech's stock price plummeted as investors absorbed the implications of the fraud allegations. Major clients announced they were terminating their contracts and seeking alternatives. Employee groups retained lawyers to investigate the pension fund diversions. Regulatory agencies launched formal investigations into the company's financial practices. Victor's response was predictably defensive and tone-deaf. He held a press conference denying all allegations and claiming he was the victim of a coordinated attack by disgruntled former employees who couldn't accept the reality of modern business practices. His attempts to discredit the evidence only drew more attention to the story, and his arrogant demeanor during media interviews alienated what little sympathy he might have retained. The shareholder meeting on April 15th was a disaster for Victor and a vindication for everyone he had wronged. Shareholders demanded his immediate resignation, and several board members publicly apologized for not providing adequate oversight of his activities. The FBI announced a formal investigation into the financial fraud allegations, and within hours, Victor was arrested at his office on charges including embezzlement, securities fraud, and violation of fiduciary duty. The local news footage of Victor being led away in handcuffs was deeply satisfying, but it was the aftermath that truly demonstrated the scope of his failure. With Victor gone, Astrotech's board began a desperate search for new leadership, and my name surfaced repeatedly as a potential candidate to help rebuild the company's reputation and operations. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning in late April. Margaret Thornton, the board chairwoman who had hired Victor 3 years earlier, sounded humble and contrite as she made her pitch. "Jason, I know we have a lot to apologize for," she began. "The board realizes now that letting you go was a terrible mistake, and we'd like to make it right. We're prepared to offer you the position of CEO with a compensation package that reflects both your value to the company and our regret over how you were treated." The offer was generous, substantially more than my previous salary, plus equity, benefits, and a formal apology to be published in industry publications. From a financial perspective, it made perfect sense. Astrotech was still a large company with significant resources, and turning it around would be a prestigious challenge that could cement my reputation in the industry. But as I listened to Margaret's proposal, I realized that going back to Astrotech would be a betrayal of everything I had learned over the past year. Evertech wasn't just a business, it was a statement about values, integrity, and the importance of building something meaningful rather than simply maximizing profits. Returning to the company that had discarded me would send the message that loyalty and principles were negotiable, that success could justify abandoning the people who had supported me during the darkest period of my life. "Margaret," I said when she finished her pitch, "I appreciate the offer and the recognition of what happened last year, but I can't accept your proposal. Evertech isn't just my company, it's a commitment to doing business differently, to proving that you can be successful without sacrificing integrity or treating people as disposable resources. Going back to Astrotech would mean abandoning that commitment and the people who believed in me when you didn't. The silence on the line stretched for several seconds before Margaret responded. I understand, she said quietly, and I respect your decision. For what it's worth, I think you're making the right choice. Evertech is lucky to have you, and I suspect Astrotech's loss will continue to be your gain. She was right. In the months following Victor's arrest and my rejection of Astrotech's offer, Evertech's growth accelerated dramatically. Companies that had been hesitant to switch from an established provider were now eager to partner with a company that represented stability and ethical leadership. Our employee count grew to 50, then 75, then over 100 as we expanded our product offerings and geographic reach. More importantly, the culture we built at Evertech reflected the lessons I had learned from my experience at Astrotech. We prioritized work-life balance, ensuring that no one would have to choose between career success and family responsibilities. We implemented transparent communication policies so that employees always understood the company's direction and their role in its success. We established profit-sharing programs that ensured everyone benefited from the company's growth, not just executives and shareholders. The personal transformation was as significant as the professional one. For the first time in decades, I was present for family dinners, school events, and weekend activities. Emma and Michael, now accustomed to having their father available and engaged, began involving me in their interests and decisions in ways that deepened our relationships. Sarah and I rediscovered the partnership we had maintained during my Astrotech years, but had rarely been able to fully enjoy due to my work obligations. The contrast with my former life was stark and enlightening. I had spent 18 years believing that my value lay in my willingness to sacrifice everything for corporate success. That loyalty meant accepting whatever demands were placed on me regardless of the personal cost. Victor's betrayal had initially seemed like a rejection of that value system, but I eventually understood that it was actually a liberation from it. The success of Evertech proved that business excellence didn't require personal sacrifice, that treating employees well enhanced rather than hindered performance, and that building trust with customers was more profitable in the long run than exploiting them for short-term gains. Every metric we tracked, employee satisfaction, customer retention, revenue growth, profit margins, validated the approach that Victor had dismissed as outdated and inefficient. 2 years after my termination from Astrotech, I received an email that perfectly encapsulated the transformation I had undergone. It was from Tom Bradley, a young programmer who had been hired at Astrotech shortly after my departure and had recently joined Evertech as a senior developer. Mr. Everett, he wrote, I wanted you to know that working at Evertech has shown me what a technology company can be when it's led by people who actually care about building great products and treating employees well. I never understood why everyone spoke so highly of you until I started working here. Now I see that leadership isn't about cutting costs or maximizing profits. It's about creating an environment where people can do their best work. The vindication was complete, but it wasn't the vindication I had originally sought. When Victor first fired me, I had wanted to prove that he had made a mistake, that I was too valuable to discard. What I eventually proved was something more important, that his entire approach to business was fundamentally flawed, that the qualities he had dismissed as outdated were actually the foundation of sustainable success. Astrotech continued its decline in the wake of Victor's scandal. The company never fully recovered from the reputational damage and financial instability his leadership had created. New management attempted various turnaround strategies, but the institutional knowledge and client relationships that had been carelessly discarded proved impossible to rebuild quickly. Market share continued to erode as customers migrated to competitors like Evertech, who offered superior products and service. Victor himself faced the consequences of his actions in ways that went far beyond professional embarrassment. The criminal charges resulted in a conviction on multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement, leading to a prison sentence and massive financial penalties. His reputation in the business community was permanently destroyed, and the assets he had accumulated through his fraudulent activities were seized to compensate Astrotech's employees and shareholders. But the most satisfying aspect of the entire experience wasn't Victor's downfall. It was the success we built at Evertech, and the proof it provided that integrity and excellence were not just compatible, but mutually reinforcing. Every former Astrotech employee who joined our team, every client who chose our solutions over cheaper alternatives, every award we won for workplace culture or product innovation validated the values that Victor had dismissed as naive and unprofitable. 3 years after founding Evertech, I stood before our assembled staff at our annual company meeting, looking out at faces that reflected the energy and enthusiasm I remembered from Astrotech's early days under Dr. Chen's leadership. We had just announced record financial results for the third consecutive year, but more importantly, our employee satisfaction surveys showed that 94% of staff would recommend Evertech as a great place to work. When I started this company, I told the assembled team, it was because I wanted to prove that experience and integrity still mattered in business. What I learned is that they don't just matter. They're essential for building something that lasts. Every one of you represents a choice to do things the right way, to prioritize long-term success over short-term gains, and to treat each other with the respect and dignity that everyone deserves. The applause that followed wasn't just professional courtesy, it was genuine appreciation from people who understood that they were part of something special, something that honored their contributions and invested in their success. It was the sound of loyalty that was earned rather than demanded, of commitment that flowed from respect rather than fear. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the journey that had brought me from the darkest moment of my career to this point of satisfaction and success. The termination letter that had seemed like an ending had actually been a beginning, the catalyst for discovering what I was truly capable of when freed from constraints that prioritized conformity over excellence. Sarah was waiting with champagne when I arrived home, ready to celebrate another successful year at Evertech. Emma, now a college sophomore studying business, was home for the weekend and eager to hear about the company meeting. Michael, a high school senior considering his own career path, had begun asking thoughtful questions about entrepreneurship and leadership. Dad, Emma said as we sat around our dining room table, sharing stories and celebrating another milestone. I've been thinking about what you've built with Evertech, and I realize it's not just a business. It's proof that you can succeed without compromising your values. That's the kind of leader I want to be someday. Michael nodded in agreement. It's pretty cool that you took something terrible and turned it into something amazing. Victor probably thought he was getting rid of a problem, but he actually just created his own competition. Their understanding of the deeper lessons pleased me more than any business accolade or financial milestone ever could. They had witnessed their father's transformation from a loyal but undervalued employee to an independent leader who built success on his own terms. More importantly, they had learned that setbacks could become setups for something better. That integrity was not a liability, but a competitive advantage, and that loyalty worked both ways. It had to be earned and reciprocated to have meaning. Later that night, as Sarah and I sat on our deck overlooking the Seattle skyline, she asked the question that had been on both our minds. Do you ever regret what happened? The termination, the struggle, all the uncertainty. I considered her question carefully before answering. I regret the way it happened, I said finally. I regret that Victor's greed hurt so many good people, and I regret the damage he did to a company that Dr. Chen built with such care, but I don't regret the outcome. If I hadn't been fired, I never would have started Evertech. I never would have learned what I was capable of building on my own. I never would have understood that my real value wasn't in being indispensable to someone else's dream, but in having the courage to pursue my own. The city lights twinkled below us as we sat in comfortable silence, contemplating the path that had led us to this moment of contentment and success. In the distance, I could see the Astrotech building where I had spent 18 years of my life. Its upper floors dark now as the company continued to struggle with the aftermath of Victor's failed leadership. I felt no animosity toward the building or the people still working there. My anger had long since transformed into something more productive, a determination to prove that business could be conducted with integrity, that employees could be treated as valuable partners rather than expendable resources, and that success measured in relationships and reputation was more meaningful than success measured purely in quarterly profits. The revenge I had initially sought was personal vindication, proof that Victor had made a mistake in dismissing me. What I had achieved was something more significant: institutional vindication of a way of doing business that honored excellence, integrity, and mutual respect. Evertech's success wasn't just my victory. It was a victory for everyone who believed that loyalty should be reciprocal, that quality mattered more than cost-cutting, and that building something meaningful was more important than maximizing short-term returns. As we prepared to go inside, my phone buzzed with a notification from LinkedIn. Another former Astratech employee was requesting to connect, their message expressing interest in joining Evertech's growing team. It was a pattern that had become familiar. Talented professionals who had been undervalued or mistreated by Victor's management style were seeking opportunities to contribute to something better. I smiled as I read the message, remembering my own feelings of worthlessness